The son who said I didn't belong in my own home. What would you do if your own son told you that elderly people don't belong in homes with growing children? How far would you go to reclaim your dignity when your family treats you like an unwanted burden in your own house? What you're about to hear will shock you. Are you ready? Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. My name is Patricia Coleman. I'm 72 years old, and I'm about to tell you the most shocking story of how my son and his family moved into my home and slowly tried to erase me from my own life. What I did to get my house back will leave you absolutely speechless. I've lived in my modest two-story house in Springfield, Illinois for 38 years. My late husband Frank and I bought it in 1986 when mortgage rates were sky high. But we managed to pay it off through decades of hard work and sacrifice. Frank passed away 8 years ago, leaving me alone in the house where we had raised our 3 children and built a lifetime of memories. The house wasn't fancy, just a simple colonial with faded blue shutters and a front porch where Frank used to sit every evening reading his newspaper. But every creaking floorboard, every paint chip, every corner held pieces of our story. It was more than a house. It was the foundation of everything I had built over for decades. When my youngest son David called me last March with the devastating news that he had been laid off from his job at the manufacturing plant, I didn't hesitate for a second. His voice was shaky and defeated as he explained that the company was downsizing, and he was among the casualties. I could hear the shame in his words, the fear about providing for his wife Karen and their 2 teenagers. "Come stay with me," I told him immediately. "The house is big enough, and you can take all the time you need to get back on your feet." I truly believed I was doing what any loving mother would do, opening my home to my child in his time of need. I had no idea I was about to become a prisoner in my own house. David arrived 3 days later, but he didn't come alone. Behind him came Karen and their 2 children, 16-year-old Madison and 14-year-old Tyler, along with a moving truck filled with their belongings. I hadn't expected all of them to move in, but I told myself it didn't matter. Family was family, and you made room. That first week, I tried to accommodate everyone. I gave them the entire 2nd floor, moving my belongings to the small guest room on the 1st floor. I rearranged my schedule around theirs, making sure the bathroom was free when they needed it, cooking meals to their dietary preferences, and generally trying to make myself as invisible as possible to avoid any friction. But something felt wrong from the very beginning. Karen never thanked me for opening my home to them. She walked through my house like she was evaluating a hotel, making mental notes about what needed to be changed. David seemed distracted and distant, spending most of his time upstairs on his laptop, supposedly job hunting, though I began to wonder if that was really what he was doing. The changes started small and subtle, like water slowly rising in a glass. My favorite reading chair in the living room disappeared one day, replaced by a modern sectional sofa that Karen said would be more practical for a family. My collection of ceramic figurines that I had gathered over decades vanished from the mantelpiece, replaced by Karen's minimalist decorative items. When I asked about my things, Karen would smile sweetly and explain that they had been moved to make room, or that they were getting in the way. My belongings began migrating to the garage, as if my own possessions were unwelcome clutter in my own home. The kitchen was completely reorganized without my input. My coffee maker, the one Frank had bought me for Christmas 15 years ago, was replaced with an expensive espresso machine that I didn't know how to use. My ceramic mugs were packed away and replaced with matching white cups that looked like they belonged in a hotel. But the most painful changes were the personal ones. The framed photographs of Frank and me, our wedding picture, family photos from when the children were young. They all began disappearing from their prominent places. Karen claimed they were outdated and cluttered the space. She replaced them with abstract art prints that had no meaning, no history, no soul. I tried to speak up, but every time I expressed concern, I was met with patronizing explanations about how these changes were for the best or would help the house feel more modern. I was made to feel like my preferences didn't matter, like I was an old woman who didn't understand contemporary living. The most devastating moment came 6 weeks after they had moved in. I was in the hallway, hanging up a small framed photo of Frank and me from our 25th anniversary, when I overheard David talking to a friend on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was relaxed and casual, the way it used to be before the stress of unemployment weighed him down. "Yeah, we're settling in well," he was saying. "It's working out great. Mom's house is perfect for us. Plenty of space for the kids, good school district. The only issue is having an elderly person in a house with growing children, you know? It's not ideal for either side." The words hit me like a physical blow. An elderly person. That's how my own son saw me, not as his mother who had opened her home to him, not as the woman who had sacrificed for decades to provide for him, but as an inconvenient elderly person who didn't belong in a house with growing children. I stood frozen in the hallway, still holding that photograph, as he continued talking about how they were considering looking for their own place, but that it was complicated because of inheritance issues and how they needed to figure out the best way to handle the situation long-term. Inheritance issues. I realized with horrifying clarity that David wasn't just staying in my house temporarily. He was positioning himself to take it over permanently. They weren't guests in my home. They were colonizers, slowly and systematically erasing my presence until I became invisible in my own life. That night, I sat in my small, cramped room surrounded by boxes of my displaced belongings, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I wasn't going to let them erase me from my own story. The next morning, I called my attorney, Margaret Hendricks, who had handled Frank's estate. I explained the situation calmly and methodically, just as I had learned to do during my 40 years as a bookkeeper. Margaret wasn't surprised. She told me she had seen similar situations before. Adult children who moved in to help their elderly parents and ended up taking over completely. "We're going to take back your house," she said firmly, legally and officially, within 3 days. Margaret had prepared a formal eviction notice. It was professional, clear, and left no room for argument. David and his family had 30 days to vacate the premises. I had the notice delivered by certified mail, and I left a copy on the kitchen counter where they couldn't miss it. I didn't say anything that evening. I ate my dinner in the sunroom, listening to the sounds of their normal family life upstairs, the television, conversations, laughter that I was no longer included in. I had become a ghost in my own home. But ghosts, I had learned, could still fight back. The next morning, David was waiting for me in the kitchen. The envelope was open on the table, and he looked pale and stunned, like someone who had been blindsided by something they never saw coming. "Are you serious about this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and rising anger. "Completely serious," I replied calmly. That's when Karen exploded. She accused me of being cruel, vindictive, and ungrateful for all they had done for me. She screamed about how they had improved the house, how they had taken care of me, how I was being selfish and heartless. I listened to her rant without saying a word, letting all that venom spill out onto my kitchen tiles. When she finally exhausted herself, I spoke quietly, but firmly. "You have for weeks, not because I owe you anything, but because I believe in doing things properly." Karen called me heartless, but what they had done to me was heartless. They had moved into my home and slowly, systematically erased every trace of my existence. They had made me feel like an unwelcome intruder in the space where I had built my entire adult life. The following weeks were tense and uncomfortable. I expected anger, arguments, maybe even attempts to negotiate. Instead, I got something worse: denial. They acted as if nothing had happened. David continued his job search routine. Karen kept rearranging my furniture, and the children went about their activities as if the eviction notice was just a piece of paper that could be ignored. But I had learned something important during my decades as a bookkeeper. Documentation is everything. I kept detailed records of every conversation, every displaced item, every change made to my house without my permission. I photographed rooms, kept receipts, and maintained a careful log of their behavior. As the 30-day deadline approached, they still hadn't packed a single box. That's when I realized they were counting on my maternal guilt to make me back down. They believed that ultimately, I wouldn't have the strength to actually evict my own son and his family. They were wrong. On the 28th day, Margaret filed the necessary paperwork with the court. On the 30th day, exactly as promised, the sheriff arrived to oversee their departure. David looked at me with a mixture of shock and betrayal, as if he couldn't believe his own mother would actually follow through on her ultimatum. But I had learned something crucial about myself in those 2 months. Being a loving mother didn't mean allowing myself to be erased. Being family didn't give anyone the right to steal my identity, my space, or my dignity. The moving truck arrived. That afternoon, I watched from my living room window as they loaded their belongings. The modern furniture, the abstract art, the espresso machine. Karen refused to look at me as she supervised the packing. David made one last attempt to make me feel guilty, talking about how difficult this would be for the children, how they would have to squeeze into a small apartment. I felt sorry for the grandchildren, truly I did. But I also knew that children are resilient, and maybe this experience would teach them something important about respect, boundaries, and the difference between helping someone and taking advantage of them. After they left, the house felt different immediately. It wasn't empty, it was spacious. It wasn't quiet, it was peaceful. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely in my own home. I spent the next week reclaiming my space, room by room. I brought my belongings back from the garage, hung my photographs back on the walls, and rearranged the furniture to suit my preferences, not someone else's idea of what was modern or practical. I painted the downstairs bathroom the soft lavender color I had always wanted, bought a new coffee maker to replace the one that had been discarded, and set up my reading corner exactly the way I liked it. Every change I made was a declaration. This is my house, and I am home. The silence in the house became my companion, not the oppressive silence of being ignored or marginalized, but the comfortable silence of solitude chosen rather than imposed. I could play my music as loud as I wanted, eat what I preferred, and move through my own space without asking permission or apologizing for existing. 3 months later, David called. His voice was different, humbler, more uncertain. He had found a job, but it paid less than his previous position. They were struggling in their small apartment, and he wondered if we could talk about reconciliation. I listened to his carefully worded apology, his explanations about stress and desperation, and not thinking clearly. But I also listened for what he didn't say, any real understanding of how his actions had affected me, any acknowledgement that I was a person deserving of respect in my own home. I forgive you, I told him honestly. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You can visit, but you can't move back in. This is my home, and I've learned that I need to protect it. Some people have asked me if I feel lonely living by myself, if I regret standing up to my own family. The truth is, I'm not lonely at all. I have my routines, my books, my garden, and my peace. I have friends who visit because they want to see me, not because they need something from me. Most importantly, I have my self-respect back. I learned that being a mother doesn't mean being a doormat, and being elderly doesn't mean being powerless. I discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to refuse to be diminished, even by people you love. My house is quiet now, but it's not empty. It's filled with my presence, my choices, my comfort. Every morning, I wake up in my own bed, in my own room, in my own house, and I remember what it feels like to matter in my own life. The walls that once echoed with other people's voices now hold the sounds I choose, my music, my television programs, my conversations with friends who call because they value my company, not because they need my resources. So I have to ask you, when someone you love starts treating you like you're invisible in your own life, how long should you stay quiet? And if your own family began slowly erasing you from your own home, would you have the courage to fight back the way I did? Let me know in the comments, because I'd love to hear about your own experiences with setting boundaries with the people you love most.